Well, good afternoon, Robin. It's great to see you and actually have this face-to-face, virtual face-to-face meeting after having corresponded quite a bit, and I've known a bit about you. And I want to tell you how pleased I am to be able to speak with you in this manner
Me
as part
too.
of the Profiles in Courage series that I run in my Substack. And just to make a few comments before we begin, first, in our discussion, Robin, between you and me, we're not practicing medicine, we're not practicing law, we're all we're doing is having an intelligent conversation, a lively conversation, I'm sure, and that's it. So, but we go wherever we want to go, and I usually put these things up completely unedited. So if there's anything you don't want to say, don't say it. and, and in advance. And otherwise, why don't you just tell our audience who you are? I mean, I know I've read your CV, and you're a man of great many accomplishments. You're a singer-songwriter, you're an author who's won awards at prestigious book festivals, um, and you're a doctor and you're a medical acupuncturist. So you're not an astronaut, however. I think I detected one omission, one glaring omission, but aside from that,
I haven't been to the moon. Um,
yeah, you're not the only one.
oh, bless you. Did you want me to say, look, when I sent you all my bios and CVs,
Yeah.
I went through all that and I thought, actually, it's very humbling. I don't think I'm necessarily this person that this CV is telling you because uh, ultimately I get my joy from my family and my uh, practice here, which I feel is fairly unique, not because I created it as unique, but all the other practices seem to have gone the other way around me. I get a lot of joy out of music, and I get a lot of joy now out of poetry. And I have been I suppose, a qualified doctor for over 50 years. I've been in general practice for over 40 years. In the last, gosh, 35 years, I've worked intimately with my wife, who's a nurse practitioner and midwife, and we've worked together at the side of our home in purpose-built rooms beside our home. So people coming into us respect that, and they feel like they're guests, and we treat them like guests, and we
Hmm.
give them a cup of tea, and we allow them to unwind. And a minimum appointment with me is half an hour, and usually the first appointment is an hour and a half, and I usually feel that's not enough, that we're just scratching the surface. Most of the time I'm listening because I think that is what's been missing from our medical system, particularly in the last 30 years or so, where I've seen a dramatic change. I'd hoped to have sort of retired sort of by now, but I'd always thought it was quite good just to work a little bit. And I'm working now in the mornings and it's working very well. But I'd have to say that we're being inundated now with people who are concerned and not feeling they're being listened to. I go along about this. I don't think it is, let's say, rocket. I don't think it's rocket science. I think you just have to listen with an open heart and almost naively, uh, like a child, without any preconceived ideas, and allow the story to unfold, their unique story. And if you're like me, I love stories, and everybody I see has a unique version of themselves, but obviously, of the conditions that they're bringing to me. And that is my education. It continues to be my education. So, and that keeps me in a sense, I suppose, a feel of wonder. I've written books because I'm still in that state of wonder. I wanted to, while you're writing a book, expand my awareness of reality. So that's why I write books, and I'm continuing to be in that situation in a sense of wonder and exploration. Uh, that's me.
And you're born and raised in New Zealand, correctly?
Now, I was born in London. I was born in
Oh,
North
born
London,
in London.
and
Okay.
yeah, and spent the first 25 years or so, 26 years in London. Yeah, and I went to, for what it was worth, Middlesex Hospital, which is part of London
Yeah.
University, and did some work in the mid-70s in the hospitals there, particularly in radiotherapy, cancer, and pediatrics. And when I came out here as a registrar about 1978,
Okay.
that's what I worked at. But my father, so you could say I've been in a medical house since I was born, nearly 75 years ago. So and my father had rooms attached to his home. And so I've been in that, I suppose, that mode of awareness for that sort of time. And the problem we had in England, why I didn't want to be a general practitioner there, is the average time people spent with their GP at an appointment was about 7 minutes. So when I came here after I worked a bit in the hospitals, I really loved the idea that I could spend a whole quarter of an hour listening to people. And that I extended that when I started to do acupuncture to 20 minutes. And that
Yeah.
wasn't enough. So then uh, when we started our practice together with my wife, Trish, we expanded that to 25 minutes. Now it's half an hour. And that's how I've evolved. And that's how I've learned, because unless you spend that time listening to that unique individual in front of you, you're not going to do that person justice. And nor are you going to get a sense of achievement out of it, either side. And so that's me. I suppose I'm a bit ambidextrous. I'm left and right-handed, and using the metaphor of left and right-brained, I suspect that has something to do with it, because I think that a lot of people who are on our page are also, in some ways, uh, I suppose, let's just say, polymaths, or there's so many people that understand what's been happening in the last few years, also have a side to them that's artistic, insightful, intuitive. And I believe that that is something that I try to retain in my practice. And I think it's one of those things that's gradually being eked out of our system. And
Yeah.
That's what I hear from people anyway. And then, so therefore the joy is eked out as well. So,
So let
we
me
need
ask
to
you,
be, yeah,
so you're in your own private practice though, correct? You're not most doctors here I think are in PHOs,
yeah.
and they have, they're part of the system and they have all these strictures about how long they see people and they practice in accordance with the rules, the PHO, et cetera. And you have the luxury, or I should call it, it's a wonderful luxury for your patients to be practicing quite differently and to shape medicine more in the way of how you've seen and experienced good medicine, which is very important. And so often, I mean, I'll give you an example. When I go to my GP, I usually forget the at least two or three things that I went expressly to go there for, because in the midst of whatever it goes on, you're out within a few minutes, and and things seem to pass your mind. As regards listening, I mean, I am a psychoanalyst by training and all that, so the idea of listening is absolutely fundamental to what I did. And, I had many patients for many years coming 4 or 5 times a week, where I would say really relatively very little in the service of this kind of comprehensive listening. But that's a whole different aspect of that kind of therapeutic work. The integration of listening into general medicine, I've always felt has been absolutely critical. And one of the things you said about uh, opening your heart reminded me of one of my early teachers at Pennsylvania Hospital, who was an internist there, who got a group of us medical students on our first rotations and would say things like, turn on your heart light,
Mm.
open your heart up. You say the same thing, open your hearts up to your patients, and in that way, you understand them as individuals, but you also have a better idea of whatever illnesses or issues are going on at the same time.
Yeah, I'm in a very privileged situation. I'd say we're very friendly, and although we do have boundaries, we act in a friendly way. And we're a special sort of friend, an advocate for the person coming to us. That is the only person, the only thing, the only person that's important. And 25 years ago or so, when they brought in the PHO system, it was clear they were basing that on the UK system, and it was actually based on 6 minutes of active listening. Because within that quarter of an hour, once you've come in, once you've exchanged pleasantries, you've got 6 minutes. And to 6 minutes to be an agent for change, to me, wasn't on. And also at that stage, the doctor, in the 80s and the 90s here, we were owners of our practices. And that's really what we had to do. We had to listen, and we were very privileged to listen to the person and provide the best service. 25 years ago, it changed because they became an employee of the government, and the doctors sort of loved it because could be paid for the patients, just in bulk for the patients, called capitation. So if they had 3,000 patients, they'd get a certain amount at the beginning of the year, and it would be in hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they'd also then be able to take holidays and feel they were earning money while they were away. So it's very attractive. But it didn't. I talked to them and I said, look, this is what I do. Where does it fit into the system? No, I wouldn't even cover my costs if I was doing what I was doing. So hence, I work from home and try to reduce my costs down. It's just us two, so we don't have any management we have to pay. And therefore, the person gets exactly what I feel is the important thing: listening, examining, and a deep discussion on their individuality and their individual thoughts about health, and respect that. And so that is why the two systems, the system that we've had in the last 25 years isn't working. We know that. And
That is unfortunately very true. And I remember that by the time I left the public system here in psychiatry, the the sense of the avalanche of destruction that was occurring within the system was immense. I really couldn't believe it was happening at such a pace. So that we really became an emergency service all the time. And that it's not how ideally you do, regular outpatient psychiatric stuff. But things changed anyway.
yeah,
That's another story in and of itself. I mean, it's very, very wonderful to hear that you are in that position to offer people what really should be the norm, I think. You go to see your doctor. Your doctor, see, this is the thing about GPs generally, not you, but GPs, in my experience, that they have very not much in the way of an understanding of the immensity of the transference experience when a patient comes to see them. I mean, you were an extraordinarily important figure, and this goes back all the way through history, the historical history, and whatnot. And what you do and say is extremely important. These insignificant gestures you make are extremely important. It's a charged atmosphere, and so the doctor has to be wholly at the service of the patient who is petitioning that doctor. And what you've set up instead with these systems is more of an assembly line. It's more of a cookie cutter. You come in, you get this, you get that, you get that, you get this, and then you're out. I mean, not that they don't do good. They do good. They do help people in that way, but it's a very different kind of approach. And I would like to talk to you a little bit about your books. I mean, these seem to be quite interesting books. I have not read them yet, but they pique my curiosity. Maybe you should tell us a little bit about uh, them.
yeah. I just happen to have them here, so to remind me of because I wrote the first one 25 years ago, and then the last one about 15 years ago. So,
Yeah.
and of course, when you finish the book, you do podcasts, and it's in your head, and it's very easy to sort of recount things and everything. So I'm reminded. The first book I wrote was called Healing Ways for Penguin books, and I just sent the local Penguin team here a couple of chapters, and they sort of said yes. The idea was that I'd been practicing and studying Chinese medicine by that time for probably 18, 19 years. And I understood, as far as I could say, how complementary that could be to my practice, that I could use what I would say the best of Eastern medicine and philosophy alongside my Western medicine, and there was no clash. But out there, it was as if this was really weird, that this was something different. This was something that we shouldn't be studying because it's alien to good practice of medicine. So I wrote Healing Ways, which was basically my understanding of of Chinese medicine, Chinese philosophy, Taoism, whatever. My understanding of that and how in practice I put that into practice in my medical work, and it sort of moved into what was then unfolding understanding about quantum physics, about consciousness, about how consciousness may be something that passes through us rather than is produced by our brain. And I entered into that conversation. And then 2 or 3 years later, I wrote a book called The Human Aerial, which was about us, how we and consciousness, how we were downloaders of consciousness. Or that was a theory. I was never dogmatic about it. I say, well, what if that was the case? What if during our lifetime we had many challenges and that actually enriched our wisdom and consciousness? And that was aligned a little bit to Ayurvedic principles. And so I started to talk about chakras, which were also a no-no. Don't talk about chakras, that's all weird stuff. But actually was very easy to understand from people because Chinese medicine's full of meridians and quite complex issues. Whereas people would understand if they're getting a problem here or a problem in their guts or a problem around their heart, that there are links to what was happening in their lives. So that was picked up by a US publisher. They didn't understand the word human aerial, so they turned it into the human antenna. And we added one or two other things. And so that was released in the States. And it did luckily win some awards.
Wonderful. Yeah.
It
So,
won Best Science Book, but also, I know, well, I didn't intend it to be a New Age book, but Best New Age Book as well. So there you are. I was obviously striding those two
well,
extremes.
yeah, that sounds like an oxymoron. New age and science don't usually go together, so that's quite an achievement. But
I
Robin,
know.
let me ask
Yeah.
you, what was it about the Chinese medicine that attracted you? And I'm going to preface that, I'm going to add to that by saying, there was a great series that the great Italian filmmaker Michelangelo Antonioni did on China. I think it was back in the 70s. He did it for TV. It's a brilliant series. He's a wonderful filmmaker. And there were aspects of Chinese medicine that were featured there. For example, pregnant women who were getting acupuncture and other kinds of approaches to healing. But let me ask you in particular, what was it that attracted you that you saw in the Chinese approach that seemed to be so critical and so important?
I started to do acupuncture in about 1981, and I joined a practice. And one of the doctors there had been to China and was doing acupuncture, and I was very impressed. And from the feedback my patients gave me about how this was helping them. Tragically, he died within 6 months at the age of 42 of a malignant melanoma. And so I sort of inherited that practice. And I was very keen to because it seemed to, when I started to do acupuncture, I felt a connection with the person in front that was enhanced over and above what I'd done before. It was sort of, and I had to use all my senses and to actually tune in to what was happening. And to cut a long story short, it would seem that the person is presenting you with a pattern. And that pattern would be, I suppose it would be body, it would be physical, it would be mental, emotional, possibly spiritual as well. And you're replying, this is what I understood pretty early on, with a pattern. We're actually, and based on certain Chinese medical principles. So you start off treating points along meridians, and you get feedback. And so you may be treating somebody with a sore neck, and then they'd phone you the next day and say, "Oh, Robin, I had the best night's sleep ever. Why did that happen?" Or you'd be treating a sore knee, and then somebody would phone up and say, "It's amazing. I've always had period pains, and I haven't had it." So I was driven by
Hmm.
those observations from the people, and as the 80s developed, I became interested in what was called the Zhang Fu, which was an understanding the linking between what they would say organs, which were actually, let's say, they would say that our physical body was a physical representation of an energetic system. Okay. So they will talk about the liver system and the spleen system. And these would be also linked to certain personality types and certain pressures and all this seemed to make sense to me. And that may well be the sort of person who sees things um, in patterns.
So let
In
me,
fact,
so let,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I don't know if I've made that clear. So some, and then in my book, I talk about, well, actually, Shakespeare talks about this. If your life depends on the liver and you vent your spleen, and
Yeah.
basically, these are observations that aren't just Chinese. They've been observations throughout all cultures that there are those links. And if you hear that from somebody, for instance, I feel liverish. I feel frustration. I can't express it, so I'm getting headaches. And you somehow give those Chinese patterns back to the person. They know they're being heard. They know they're being heard because
Yeah.
they go, aha, I get that. That's really what's happening. And so to me, it was totally opened up a sense, a communication that I had with people, but I couldn't do it in 10 minutes, quarter of an hour. I
Yeah, of
couldn't do
course
it.
not. No, that's fat. I mean, I'm thinking
Mhm.
several lines now. One of which is that in a way, there's a sense that the material body is the manifestation of these other energies, really,
Yeah,
however you describe them. Okay, and there's a material representation. A pure materialist would just say material is everything, and there's nothing else, and it's atoms and molecules and whatever. Um, the idea of an antenna or an aerial or the
mhm.
idea of other forces. This may sound silly, but I observe this in my interactions with pigeons. I
Yeah,
go to the beach and I have pigeons come and visit me when I'm sitting there, and seem to have different personalities. They have different
mhm.
energies.
Yeah,
They seem attracted to certain energies and people. And I mean, that's a small aside, but you also remind me of the very birth of psychoanalysis when Freud, in his case of Dora, where he listened to Dora, he was able to understand through her recounting of her emotional life and her free and associating to various things, how physical illnesses would disappear, how her blindness was resolved, for example, and many other cases, which also go back to Charcot, who induced physical illnesses in people and ailments, paralyses via hypnosis. So there's a very intricate kind of string that goes along with this idea of the critically important aspect of the totality of person's emotional life and everything else that develops within the body and beyond.
yeah, absolutely. And with David Bohm, of course, after the Second World War, his idea of the implicate order and the explicate order, and that so behind the explicate order, um, these realities that we
Yeah,
experience, these physical realities, there's something else. There's some other deeper aspect that isn't as tangible, but you know, though when you have a deep conversation with somebody about their life story, their implicate order, if you like, can start expressing itself. You could say, and some would say, well, that's closer to a soul, that there's a pattern that's developed. And yeah, so I started to look at people like David Bohm and also some modern interpretation of, uh, I suppose, the physics of the body, because basically Chinese medicine is the physics of the body we're talking about. And so the physics of the body is so related to our emotions, which
yeah,
are physics. They're
yeah.
not,
Okay, yeah. That's
and it's the same with depression, as you know, and anxiety. There isn't a blood test. We can talk about it being to do with serotonin or whatever, uh, but that is not the language of the person coming to see us. And so I felt me gaining some insights and writing about them would actually help people own their issues and also developed solutions that weren't just coming out of a bottle and a pill bottle. It doesn't. I've had to carry on studying my other Western medicine. I have to do all these yearly inventories, as you
Yeah.
probably do. But I found by doing this, I prescribe far less. And even smaller doses, you could almost say micro doses, work very well once the person's awareness is drawn in
Yeah,
to
and that is
their
really,
situation.
and that is quite fascinating. And again, I mean, and what we Freudians would say about some of this is that there's this vast terrain of the unconscious that
Yeah.
underpins virtually everything we do and really runs almost everything we do. And it's that again, that dichotomy between what you see and what we don't see, but what is
Yes.
actually there.
Yeah.
So I can see that commonality. But I think within the practice, I mean, and the practical aspects of practicing as a GP, you have a lot of advantages. You have the laying on of hands, you have listening, you have the checking the blood pressure, checking parts of the body. You have now, and you bring to that this other aspect of a much grander assessment of other forces going on.
Yeah,
So
even taking the pulse is a two-way process. In Chinese medicine, you take it in three different different positions and three different depths, so 3 times 3, 9. There are 27 different. But it's an interchange between you and the person. And ultimately, especially men don't get touched that way much.
yeah,
And it is, yeah, I would say a sacred art. And we are so privileged at the moment to be able to do it. The time may come where we have to be separated from that. But there's such, so we're talking about the art of medicine and how I would like to think that it survives. And I think it will if people um, still appreciate it. And I think they do. But it could be a battle for the next few years.
well, Robin, everything's a battle, I think, as I think I'm understanding now. And I'm going to have to ask the obvious too, which is, okay, we were all hit by the COVID experience. What were your initial reactions? How did you cope? What did you think? Um,
Having spent a long time on this planet, observing especially new medications and innovations, I'd have to say I've been cautious all along about new pills, new advances in medicine, and I was concerned that, well, first of all, the treatment of this seemed to be hugely rushed, and I couldn't understand how on earth that something could be safe and effective and be proven to be safe and effective at a time where it was still investigational. I
yeah,
said the word
and you
investigation.
mentioned you used the word treatment, right? Because
Yeah,
that's exactly what they proposed.
yeah,
That was their treatment. There was
yeah,
no other treatment. Remember, stay
yeah.
home. If you can't breathe, we'll come to the hospital and we'll do something. But that was their treatment. That's a very important point. Their
Is that
treatment was this thing.
And so I did a study. I actually opened up communication with MedSafe because I think people may remember there were 58 or points or worries that they had, questions that they
Yes.
had
Yeah.
for Pfizer. And it seemed to be that all those questions were answered
Within
within
two
a
days, I
few
think
months.
2 days they
Yeah,
were answered. Now there were objections raised by the guy at MedSafe, and then 2 or 3 days later they got
yeah.
wiped away, and all of a sudden everything was fine.
And particularly those, I sort of, when you have an independent practice like myself, and I welcome people with really quite complex problems. And for many years, I was being referred really complex, chronic illness problems. And so a lot of my people that come to see me have autoimmune conditions. And I was particularly keen to find out if this was safe for people with pre-existing autoimmune
Yeah.
conditions,
Yeah.
rheumatoid arthritis or whatever. And there were particular questions about that. There were questions also about the lipid of the lipid nanoparticle, ALC 159 and 300 and something, which were always used experimentally. So those are the two things I focused on. I wanted to know what are we doing? How could we induce autoimmune complexes in people who already had a profile of autoimmune disease? And I didn't get a satisfactory answer. So they delayed it, and then at the end they just said, "Oh yeah, it's all right." But not just intuitively, it was common sense to me that they hadn't looked at this or they hadn't had these questions answered, and I wondered if they even thought about it as
Well,
much as I
Robin, that
did.
was one of the first things that came to my mind. I'm a psychiatrist, remember, psychoanalyst,
Yeah,
not a hands-on GP.
yeah.
But I said immediately, this is going to be an autoimmune. This has the potential to be an autoimmune disaster, and what's being done about that? So we have that in common in our concern about that fundamental aspect of this so-called treatment.
I've also what's evolved in my practice and understanding is so much chronic illness, both physical, mental, and we would say can't separate them. Uh, there's a past history of trauma, and the trauma, particularly in early life. And I have seen that over the last 30 years. People have, if you're in an environment where somebody trusts you, which is great because I'm here with Trishan, so that is an environment of trust. People do then feel comfortable in after a time to explain the traumas they've been through. And I was amazed the amount of incest that we were uncovering at the very least, and also how, as we now know, adverse childhood experiences have somehow set the body. It's into either fight or flight or towards fight or flight to afford a defensive mode. And that would reflect both in their how they've lived their life, but also in their physiology and their immune systems.
Yeah,
So when you
and
start
their perception of the world too. Every aspect of the world, the way they perceive the world, is altered by
they're
those experiences.
hypervigilant, they
Yeah,
everything is, they're put
a
on
threat.
edge.
Everything's a threat, potential threat, and
And over I have noticed that those who have been most affected and injured have been those who've also had quite severe. Now, it's not entirely the truth. There are exceptions to this rule, obviously. So it doesn't mean everybody who's been injured
yeah,
by the vaccine has had had real trauma. But certainly that is true. And it would seem to be that we have started we have not only given them a chemical insult, but we've also insulted them on that level because we have actually, one of the things when people go through trauma or where they've been uh, involved with people who have been traumatic to them, they've been connected to people with narcissistic personality, if you like. Uh, this huge feeling of betrayal and and also an invasion, I could say a soul invasion that they
oh yeah,
feel.
yeah,
And this aspect of the injury to me has been huge. And it requires then the person dealing with them in the medical profession or the healing profession to establish a relationship of trust. And one has to do that. Well, it's essential that we do that. And that is what has been lacking. And that relationship itself is incredibly healing because often
yeah,
that person hasn't been able to talk to another adult with a
yeah,
sense of trust. Now we have to earn that trust. I see I can't assume that they're going to have that trust in me or us. We have to earn that trust. We have to show it. And yeah, we know that people are initially even coming to see me after seeing many doctors. They're suspicious. They're suspicious of what we could be up to. I
yeah.
have to earn that trust, whatever. It makes the job really exciting and interesting for me because it's a challenge. Yeah.
Well,
So
you're sort of a reservoir of practical wisdom when it comes to healing and treating patients as a result of your approach and as a result of your experience. And again, in the modern system, one of the things I remember very vividly from my internship back in was it 80, 86, 87, was going in and in the hospital you're on call every third, fourth night, and you're sleep deprived and all that, and you're all these millions of patients, and a woman had been admitted with a pneumonia, and she had a stroke. She suffered a stroke. And her intern at the time, I forget his name. He was a wonderful man, again, wise, whatever, went into her room. The family was so distraught, she was debilitated, she this, that. And he very calmly explained that when her pneumonia resolved, that her stroke symptoms would also be much, much better, and that he was going to take care of things and all that. And lo and behold, a few days later, when it did resolve, she was 100% better. And here was the just the man with tremendous experience, tremendous practice who could go in and say that with confidence to a patient and provide a great healing energy to her, to her family, and everyone around her. And it has remained with me for many, many years, the example of him doing
If
that.
you feel it that the person's going to get better, express it. Say, well, you do know you will get better. Okay. If you feel it, say it. You obviously don't want to say it if you feel the person isn't. But actually on many levels they will get better because they will either come to terms with what they've got or they'll accept it and they'll see they will have a more expansive life experience.
Yeah, and what
But
I what I think I
yeah,
what I think I witnessed was that this man with this tremendous clinical experience was
yeah,
able to say with confidence from his assessment of everything that she would get better,
yeah,
that she
yeah,
could be, she didn't have to worry as much, that et cetera, et
yeah.
cetera. And it was remarkable to see that. I mean, so you're in a position where you have that to impart to the next generation or the current generation of practitioners. Um, should they should you have the opportunity, or should they avail themselves of an opportunity?
Yeah, and I I'm a great follower of the master apprentice way of doing medicine, and in fact, that's how medicine's been practiced. Master being can be a woman, by the way, and often has. And so I've had great mentors and people that I've really admired, and it's usually that it's their wisdom, their kindness, their astuteness. They can be strange characters, they can be grumpy or whatever, but you know deep down they're respected and respectful of the people that they're seeing. And it worries me a little bit is that now doctors are expected to follow protocols, not individuals, human,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
human, and with all our faults and our strangeness, they're the doctors who really connect with people. And I assure you, there's a healing in that connection. There's healing in that connection. And it does mean that you don't have to do so much more. You have to realize that that first session where you've listened, they're beginning to connect the dots. And somewhere in their consciousness, there's some healing going on. And it also means that somehow they don't feel this shame. They're not self-critical of being in that situation by joining the dots. It's no wonder this happened to me, for instance, no wonder this. I'm not unusual. I shouldn't be blaming myself. It just
That
happens
that's a good
naturally.
point. That's a very good point psychologically, because psychologically, people who are ill often blame themselves for the occurrence of the illness. It's a sign of their sins. It's
Yeah,
a sign of weakness and whatnot. And you're talking about the healing connection with someone who respectfully listens, but who also has expertise in knowing how to
yeah.
treat something with the appropriate tools. Again, I feel like you're talking about a lost art. I was, before I left psychiatry here, we would see these young people coming in from the UK, for
Mm,
example, who would follow the nice protocols for everything. Now, psychiatry, you have to understand, under the best of circumstances, diagnoses are fuzzy. They're very,
mm,
very
mm,
fuzzy. They're all over the place. You don't,
mm,
but these people would come in, they would somehow have the ability to make these very clear-cut lineal diagnoses and then follow the menu of how to do this, and that, and basically miss the boat
mm.
on a very complex person with all kinds of issues, and let alone the general vagueness about diagnostic entities in psychiatry. And it was very disturbing to see this, because what would happen is that management would then take the position, well, if you didn't follow the protocol to do this, and that lithium and add this, then you were doing something wrong. And if anything happens, then you're going to be blamed for whatever. as opposed to what you need to do. And this is I'm not speaking at a very basic level of
Mm.
basic psychiatric practice, not a grand level. Even there, you had to be cognizant of the dimensions and the vagueness and the appropriateness of what to use, when to use, what not to use, etc.
Mm.
So that's just another aside in that realm. Uh,
And as a psychiatrist, you don't have the benefit I have of being friendly with the person or them to perceive you as a friend so much. I mean, you do become friendly with them, I know that, but you have to, yeah, I suppose there has to be some balance in your life. But I find that I, I don't. We have boundaries here because people come to our home, but very rarely are those boundaries abused by them, by the people. In fact, more respectful the
yeah,
fact that we work at home and kind to us in return. So I don't know. Yeah, the idea of transference, absolutely. Uh, I sort of assumed that transference occurs all the time, and I deal
yeah,
with it. And
yeah,
because sometimes it's really important to tell the person that you feel exactly the same, or you've been through a difficult time like theirs, or somebody close to you has been through that time. That that can be something that's really important. It's up to us to judge how to do that. But certainly, I suppose I'm more Jungian in that. I feel that transpersonal stuff is happening all the time anyway. And then, and occasionally it's overstep the patient can take advantage, but very rarely I found. Yeah, mostly it's just very satisfying. It sounds like I'm great. I'm not. I feel I'm a very normal doctor. By the way, I don't, in no way do I feel that this is um, a skill that is not some, I think it's a skill that everybody naturally has, and we've just enhanced it. We've just nurtured it, I think, the skill of being
well,
kind to people. Yeah.
I think what you're saying that you're talking about, doctors came out of a long history of the notion of healing, of
Mm,
healers.
mm,
Okay. Now, it's one thing, you're not saying that you're a guru, that
no,
you're someone whom they have to pay obeisance to.
mm,
But you're saying you from a tradition of healers uh, through millennia, at least 2,000 years, and probably more, where you practice the arts of listening, of making sense out of complex phenomena, which include not just the material
mm,
entities that you're told about or see, but other things that are going on that your listening helps to elicit.
mm.
Correct?
Yeah,
So that to
absolutely.
me, so that to me
Absolutely.
sounds that fits right in the bailiwick of the family GP we had in South Philadelphia, the Italian doctor who would do home visits and sit
Absolutely.
sit and listen, sit with the family, find out what was going on with mom or grandmom and all that, and do what he had to do, and then go off to I mean, he did home visits all day, basically.
Yeah, and you'd
Uh,
look at the photographs, and you'd look at the books,
yeah,
and
of course. Yeah,
and you'd gain so much from that.
yeah.
And they were so respectful because you felt so privileged that you were allowed to come in this guise of being somebody possibly quite wise. Not always the case, but uh, and it is a privilege. I mean, we still do occasional home visits, but we get people coming from everywhere now, so I can't do a home visit to
Oh
Warkworth
yeah,
or
yeah,
Tauranga or whatever.
yeah.
I spent a few years as a director of a hospice too, so for terminal patients, I will gladly visit. And just your presence, I think, supports them, and that's if they're local. But it became for a lot of doctors, it's just not economic to be away from a practice for possibly 2 hours to doing one visit,
Yeah.
and that's why it's died. I think they'd like to do it, and they occasionally do still.
I think there's a role for that actually. I mean, I
Yeah,
remember doing home visit as a psychiatrist in the States in private
yeah.
practice when necessary. I was the psychiatric psychiatrist, psychological advisor to a music conservatory. A lot of young classical players, young students and teachers, and I did quite a few home visits on those occasions for all
They
kinds
were
of
called
reasons.
domiciliaries, weren't they? When the
Domiciliaries,
specialist,
yeah, is that,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
the specialist who often a general physician would visit. My father used to invite. a domiciliary, so we're getting so and so to do a domiciliary, and yeah, that's what they were, and the specialists would go in too. Yeah, very special.
And the other thing I was going to mention too is one of the other things uh, about good doctors. I think I was very lucky to have gone to a very wonderful medical school, despite the fact we didn't learn very much about nutrition and vaccines were something that were just understood to be good for everybody. But this is back in the 80s. But nonetheless, I remember a specialist doing rounds. I think he was a neurosurgeon doing rounds on patients in our hospital. And he would wash his hands when he went into a patient's room visibly. There's a sink usually there, and he would talk and all that, but he would not wash his hands after. And he did that ex specifically because he didn't want to give them the psychological burden of having them think that they were dirty and he had to wash the
Yeah,
dirt off. So these were
excellent.
little things. That was a
Yeah,
very astute specialist, doing things like that. Um,
yeah, and what did doctors used to do? They used to ask to look at your tongue. Now, in Chinese medicine, there's books this thick on tongue diagnosis, where the patterns occur on your tongue, what color of your tongue, the shape of your tongue. It actually gives you an idea of what the Chinese diagnosis would be. And again, you'd always go to the doctor and show your tongue. And it's almost like an instant CT scan when you know a bit of Chinese medicine, where like this, you can do
yeah.
the same. And the same with the pulse. All of this is the art which is informing you directly of what's happening. Now we've got, unfortunately, a whole generation who want to have blood tests before they're examined. They actually think that there are blood tests that are better than being listened to and they've got it down the other way around. And I think unfortunately that may be by design because it looks like the doctors like me are being there's a sort of passive or even active phasing out of this medicine because we can be a problem in the system. If we can actually block what the big plan could be, which is actually so doctors are becoming disempowered. And with AI, if you're just following a protocol, there may well be that AI algorithms can do it better. Again, that's not what I would like to happen. And it may well be that. So, the sort of medicine we're talking about, I believe we have to firmly fight for. And
Well, Robin, how do we do
yeah,
that exactly? I mean, let me say one more thing as an aside. I would always tell people not to treat the numbers, treat the patient, not the numbers.
yes,
People who were heavy on getting 10,000 blood tests because they covered their ignorance about what was going on. They
yeah,
get a blood test for everything, so they could just say, well, we did this, that, the other. And there were occasions, for example, we had a patient referred. I was working at a psych unit, an inpatient unit, who they said this woman's just going to die. They transferred her from the medical ward to the
mm,
psych ward. Said, listen, she's really on her way out, so there's not much you can do, but whatever you can do, do whatever.
mm,
And the key to her recovery was for us to just go take a very basic approach, not to be alarmed by all these things they were alarmed by, to reduce the 10,000 medicines she was already on for
mm,
reasons we couldn't even figure out. And
mm,
she walked out of there in very good shape. Actually, she
mm,
recovered
yeah.
very well. Uh, but how do you, particularly as the GP has uh, great special status, I think, with people.
Mm, mm.
How do you preserve what you're doing, enhance it, and fight against this mechanistic, algorithmic onslaught that we're faced with?
Well, um, again, I don't try not to burn out. I'm keen to do this forever if I can, and therefore I'm not overloading myself now. I've got too much work in some ways, so I'm making sure that I do consultations in the morning. Like you, I have my music and I have my artistic expression, and I plot my subconscious through my poetry and my songwriting. That to me is essential for me and I encourage people coming to see me to get their version of this going. So, in other words, it's whatever their creative, to honor their creative spirit, let's say. I find that's very necessary for me. It's very necessary.
Well, Robin, I think I look back at my practice and all my therapeutic patients and analytic patients, the people who did the best really were those for whom that creative spirit was able to emerge more fully.
Mm.
It was really the key to everything, I believe. Uh, but I'm gonna no, yeah, I'm gonna not let you off the hook. How do we keep this other stuff from uh, overriding us? What do we
Yeah.
do? Are there practical things we should do? Are there organizational things we should do? Um,
Well, I walk in nature. I know when you're being overwhelmed. I love the forgiveness and constancy and change of nature. I uh, focus on loving relationships. I do not listen to mainstream news much at all, unless it's something that I need to know on behalf of the patients that are coming to see me. And yeah, and I keep interested in, uh, I suppose, yeah, the arts, I suppose
do,
as
do you,
well.
but do you think the system is going to be overwhelming to us? Do you think the system is just going to churn out mechanistic doctors? Are we going to have a chance to enlighten them? Are they going to rediscover what it means to be a real healer? What do you see? If working in a DHB, I can tell you now, at least when I was working
Mm.
at DHB, that was becoming less and less tenable by the day. I mean, it was remarkable how the decline of that whole system. So, in other words, do we have a chance to kind of stem the tide?
Yes, I firmly believe that the we could help initiate a renaissance, a new renaissance. And I hark back to what happened 200 years ago in Germany and the Romantic movement of the 1800s. All were in some way being uh, threatened, I suppose, by the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution. And yet the human spirit survived and created possibly the greatest art, poetry, and that we've ever known, and music that we've ever known. Uh, and I think it's up to us to do that. And I've read a number of books recently about those times where the scientists and the poets and the playwrights and the artists and the botanists all got together and basically um, joined together with their enthusiasm about what it is to be human. And
Well, I
so
think I think Goethe was a great example of that.
Goethe,
I mean,
yeah,
my
this
God, a
this was
magnificent.
and that was in Jena, and then there was a whole group in Jena in that university set up in it, so where that's what happened. They all observed. So the poets went to the lectures or the botany lectures, and the botany lectures came to the poet. And so, in other words, I see that is the future. It's a reality, and I am quite excited about it because I feel I can have some sort of role in this, some very small role, and it seems to be something that I think could well be happening. How do you feel, if I can
I
ask
think
you?
I share your optimism. I think we're in the midst of a huge transformation, and
Yeah.
I think that despite there are a lot of alarmists,
Mm,
understandably so, about
mm,
how terrible things are going, but I believe we're ripe for a rejuvenation of real medicine, of good healing, and of the arts as well. So I'm optimistic about that. As long as there is the human spirit, people have the capacity for some metaphor. They go beyond the material.
yeah.
That's a hard sell sometimes. There are a lot of literal people, concrete people. Uh, that we have more than a chance that we're in the midst of a flux for sure. And medicine, if COVID did nothing else, it exposed everything wrong about system medicine
Mm,
and system precepts. Everybody's got to understand that. Even the people who don't even follow these things have to understand something went awry. This is not how things are supposed to be. And
Yeah.
as a result, a lot of people are much more enlightened and are looking for a better way, I think.
Yeah, I feel
Do you
optimistic
agree with
in
that?
that
I mean, do
way.
you agree with
Yeah.
that? Yeah,
No, I do feel that, and it's what people say there. Obviously, I'm somewhat selected by these people to come to see, so the like will be attracted to me. But I do agree that this is, and I'm actually impressed by the young people that are coming in, the young teenagers who get it. We're able to have this conversation. Uh,
great.
yeah, and yeah, I even had one that was writing a postcard the other day, in cursive, as they call it.
Cursive. Oh my
They call
God.
it cursive, joined up writing.
Yeah,
Is that cursive? I don't know. But
your
and
handwriting,
so
yeah, cursive,
yeah,
yeah.
so there actually you
Yeah,
get the 13-year-olds that are rebelling against this because they
yeah.
do. They rebel against their older sisters, who are and so I see some really good signs and real experiences that are so important. So yes, we've talked about AI, and AI is here, and uh, it can be used for our benefit. It can even expand our consciousness if
Yeah.
we allow it to work alongside us. It doesn't take over. But the human spirit is, yeah, eternal. So I'm optimistic.
Well, Robin, tell us more about your singing and songwriting and your performance and your albums and everything like that. Let people, I think, would be really happy to hear about that.
Um, Something just flashed up to saying it's going to end or something, but 2 minutes ago, but it never did. So that's all right. Is that all right? This isn't going to
We,
end.
I've got a
You've
Zoom
got.
account. I can go on for 10 hours if we have
That's why
to.
I've been talking a bit quickly,
Yeah.
so I,
No,
I
that's
can.
no rush, no rush.
Okay. Well, in the mid 90s, I started to write songs. It actually was about the time where I was meditating and doing Qigong and connecting with nature. And so I started to write songs. And then I went into a studio with my old guitar and tried to convince them to record, which I did. I paid them for that to happen. I recorded my first album 1998, I think. And since I've recorded 5 other albums, and
Great.
also we've done a show here, what I call a musical odyssey. We did at the Fringe Festival just before lockdown. And that was based on my father's war experience and also how my own experiences paralleled that. And it was together with my songs, which are basically blues and bit of rock and roll and folk, whatever. Um, and I sing every week at a open mic, which is a fabulous.
Oh,
We have a
that's
fabulous
great.
community
Geez,
of
that's
about,
great.
and we get 60 or 70 people at a time. Now there's so many people want to perform that we have to apply, many days ahead to get our 10-minute slot. And I have to say, how does that really keeps me going? That really does.
That's great.
And so the music is as hugely important as is my understanding of creativity, because I found that the best songs just came when I wasn't overthinking. Uh, a subconscious download, if you like. Those were the best songs, and the best songs that people appreciate are heart songs, the love songs.
Yeah, that's
Um,
in fact,
and
I met with the pianist earlier today
yeah,
to go over a few songs, and
yeah,
we had a beautiful discussion about kind of the American songbook and songs
yeah,
that he liked, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I
And
think
and yeah, and so I love all that. I do a cover every week as well as one of my songs, and that really keeps me going.
so. Who are your favorite other songwriters, or do you have any favorite songs you can pull out of the air?
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
I was influenced. I remember when I was 14 by Dylan. We had a I think a folk music group at our school, and this old gramophone somebody put blowing the wind on, and I couldn't believe what the noise I heard from that. So I really connected with the songwriters of the 60s and 70s,
yeah,
and I suppose that's my style. I try to keep abreast of a lot of people, more, I suppose, contemporary folk too.
yeah,
And I love the blues and rock on, but I also connect with jazz. And I in the late 70s, I connected with bands like Weather Report, and El D'Amelio, and the whole group of that more sort of jazz funk area.
Yeah,
Miles
yeah,
Davis was developing into that. And I've
yeah,
since gone
yeah.
back much further into, the classical American songbook. And I sing things like Miss Otis Regrets, wonderful, incredible story about murder and hanging in about 3 minutes. It's fantastic. So yeah, that's so that, but I have a very wide taste. I love classical music. I found I could meditate to Mahler, and Mahler was telling me about living and dying in, 20 minutes, without me having to connect too
Speaking
much.
of Mahler, Mahler met Freud in a very famous encounter in Holland, and they had to
Mm,
talk for 4 hours. I wrote a paper about this some years ago, and it had some very tremendous implications for Mahler and his relationship with his wife after that meeting and whatnot. And I went through a phase before I was writing this
mm.
paper of listening to Mahler. I mean, I must have for years must have been immersed in Mahler to the point where my friends were quite put off by the fact that that's who I was playing and listening to.
It's
But
Mahler's Ninth, which has a 27-minute um, uh, passage, if you like, that and it was clear he was writing this when he was thinking he was going to die. And so for 20, if you meditate with this in your ear, you go through all the chaos and all the conflict. And then, I don't know, the beautiful thing, if you listen to a live version, it just fades away. You know this. And then if there's an audience there, it takes them about a minute to clap because they're brought into that silence.
yeah, yeah,
And then,
it's
and that when I was working at the hospice, that seemed to be really, uh, I don't know, it was in many ways reassuring that we hear this is because so much in medicine we're trying to fight this awful thing called death. And all you do is you listen to that and you just drifts away. And is this the thing that we fear,
yeah, that's
Um,
another beautiful point, exactly. And again, to get back to COVID, they played upon people's true Achilles heel, which is this
mm,
almost universal, uh, I don't know what to call it, not just fear of death, but like
mm,
phobia of the fact they're going to get harmed, they're going to die, anything's going to happen.
yeah.
It's a part of life. It's a
Mm,
part of life, can be a beautiful part of life. We're all going to get there, and hopefully we get there in a beautiful way with our lives. But yeah, you bring up Mahler, man. That is he's written
mm.
some magnificent things. And that, yeah, just absolutely incredible.
As far as
Um,
my, and I know you're a poet too, my poetry is my journal of my subconscious because it tends to be things that come out first thing in the morning, hypnagogic state or whatever. So it's almost like a dream journal. And what I did with my book, which I published last year, I didn't put the dates down. It was in chronological order, but I didn't put the dates down. Now I'm putting the dates down, so I'm seeing it as a journal, and how somehow there's some other voice that is coming through,
Coming through and
which
speaking, yeah,
which we may not know at the time. It's
yeah.
interesting when you look back and think, "Oh, it's
That's a
interesting. There
great
was
idea. That's a beautiful idea, actually.
there's a pattern developing here." Yeah, so
Because
that's
I often
been
think about if I were to write an autobiography, I'm sure it would never and capture or comprehend what I think is the totality of myself, or even part of the totality.
no.
And in fact, what does that, as you've said, much more powerfully, perhaps cryptically, are the poems that I've written that very few people
Mm,
read. That's okay. The poems that I've written that I can go back to myself that really do, as you say, they allow something deep within oneself to emerge that is a better record of the
mm.
journey than some prosaic explanation of what you've done here and there and whatever.
And the
Uh,
songwriting does that, or it comes from a slightly different place, the
yeah, the
songwriting.
songwriting, yeah, it's a different place.
A
It's
different muse.
a different muse,
I
but
think they're cousins, these muses,
yeah,
but
they get all their cousins. Yeah, I think it's a good way to put it. Their cousins.
they uh, but the poetry is the most honest, I think, the most honest I can
Yeah,
be with
I
my
think when you come
yeah,
to it, it is the most fundamental because it is shorn. Even
mm,
music is was so primeval and beautiful and
yeah,
alluring. But with poetry, you're left with words. You're left with naked words,
yeah, you're so
and
exposed.
there's
Yeah,
nothing you can adorn them. They're there, and they create their music. They create their own. It's a different kind of music.
yeah,
That could be a song. You got to write a song about that. A different kind of music.
yeah.
How's that?
I recently just got a book on Bashu, who was the haiku poet, and I'd never done haiku before because it's a bit too organized. You're the
Yeah,
five syllables,
yeah.
seven and five, and so I've started to do that, and actually it was very interesting. But he, again, his he's as important in Japan as Shakespeare is in the
Yeah,
UK,
yeah.
and it appealed to me because the Zen side of things appeals to me. I'm, I like that more instant connection, and also adding in a bit of discipline into it.
And
So I
that's
found,
also
yeah,
yeah. I'm not going to say something too, if I may interrupt. Am I
mm,
interrupting too much? I was
no, 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 no,
okay.
just I
Well, I'm
love
going to
it. I
say
love it.
I was at a lecture from an American poet laureate, Robert
Yeah,
Pinsky, and I asked him about the sonnet form, and he said, well, the
mm,
sonnet form, and
yeah, yeah,
he rattled off a little Shakespeare, he forgot it, and
mm,
all that. Uh, but there's something about form too that can be very important, and
yeah,
something about rhyme, which I think that's part of the attraction of songs now for me. I'm freer to allow, almost every popular song rhymes. Almost every popular song I know has rhyming elements. They rhyme. Poetry these days, you're sort of looked down upon if you're writing rhyming poetry.
yeah.
Although when I also think about the poems that I remember, I don't think even my own that I think some of them are great. I can't even remember them because those great poems don't rhyme. I mean,
Yeah, I
honestly,
know.
Robin, it's pretty simple. And then I think of something by Robert Frost,
Yeah.
Fire and Ice. I remember that. It's a magnificent, small, beautiful poem, stopping by woods in a snowy evening. Magnificent, you know?
And Emily
Um,
Dickinson,
and Emily
similarly.
Dickinson, oh, of course, yeah, Emily Dickinson is just,
She, she yeah. I was going to say something. I can't remember. It doesn't
No, her
happen.
poems, another. After great pain, a formal feeling comes. The words sit, the nerves sit ceremonious like tombs. Beautiful. She was a great poet. Yeah,
Sonnets, there's this, I suppose, quite strict meter. And in the middle, there's a challenge to the first number of lines. And then the last two lines are almost summing things up.
yeah.
And I went to a workshop on this and I said, this is very similar to the middle eight or the bridge that we use in a song.
In a
A
song, yeah.
bridge comes in. And it's interesting because some songs you don't need, as you don't need a bridge.
That's
Sometimes
right.
you don't need a chorus, and they're
That's
just as
right.
powerful songs.
That's
And
right.
I used to think, oh gosh, I need to produce more chords in here. This needs to be a bit. But some of the greatest songs are very simple, and in fact, that simplicity is the same with poetry. I think it's somehow, yeah, and it's a
That's right.
challenge too,
It
which
is,
is I enjoy the challenge. Yeah.
and Yates also was a rhyming
Oh,
poet from them, and he's written,
absolutely.
and his last poems were very spare, very powerful, very beautiful. So, and I also, I was discussing with the pianist today too about accompanying singers and whatnot,
Mm,
and we talked about how, you could really, if you do too much in a by playing a song with the singer, you're going to
mm.
kill the song.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
is that there's a judgment. A judgment has to come in about how simple to be, how appropriate to be at certain points. And this goes in for almost everything. As a psychoanalyst, you might have a great interpretive idea that dying to kind of impart to the patient, and yet you may have to get that down to three or four words at the right moment, you know?
It's the space that you create
Yeah,
in medicine, the space within a poem and the space within a song.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, less is best. It really is. and you allow and you paint a picture with a song like you do, but you also have to leave the imagination for the person. You can't it can be literal. You can do literal songs, they work sometimes, but usually there's a landscape that you're creating.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, this really has been a beautiful discussion. And before we conclude for today, if there's anything you want to show people, your books or leave links, make sure I have all the links to your albums and books and whatnot. And I hope to get up to meet you in person and
yeah.
to
Oh,
have
no, I
a
really
nice
enjoyed
walk
this.
and among other things. But it's an inspiration that you were able in this kind of environment to continue to practice what I would call fundamental and good medicine. I don't know what the for which phrase to use. Just this is the healing medicine to be a
Yeah,
healer
yeah,
in
yeah.
this environment, Robin.
It's very natural. I find it very natural, so I don't find it so much of a strain. I get tired, but I don't. I find that very natural. I've got a website which is chock full of stuff, and everybody says there's too much in it, but I just you'll find your way through that. robinkelly.co.nz.
Okay.
Um, Sadly, you'll find me on Spotify because I get nothing out of it. But please, if you could go in and listen to my all my albums, you can there.
Okay.
I
Good.
prefer people buy my albums here, but I realize people don't have CD machines so much now. And the same my books. The I've got my first book I've got here. The other books it got became too expensive for me to import, so you can get those through Amazon. The Human Antenna and the Human Hologram I haven't talked much about, which talks about holographic science and other speculative things, and you can get those through the usual sources.
Beautiful.
Yeah, but yeah, and I'm just live at home here, so you'll find me any
Well,
day.
thank you very much. And I hope we have a follow-up conversation in the near future
Yeah,
and that I get to meet you in person and we can continue these discussions and you continue to be an example for young people coming up in this profession, young artists, young doctors, artists, whatever.
and thank you. And you're an inspiration too. And when I discovered you, well, obviously some time ago, but I hadn't realized there was this other side of you, the songwriter. And you're brilliant, by the way. You're very good, and I knew we would connect in some way and make sense of a world that is confusing at times.
Robin, thank you. I'm going to stop here and thank you immensely. Okay.
Bless you. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for listening. Thank you.